Right then. So, today we are going to learn about materials, shaders, and textures. Our objectives are to identify what a material is, to describe the key components of a material, and to explain the difference between texture maps. Alright? So, before I go on to the next slide, anyone want to tell me what they think a material is? What the object's made out of? What else? What else could it be? Nothing? Okay. So, a material in 3D is a combination of texture maps that can be applied to a 3D mesh. Right, in 3D software, the main types of materials that you can use by default are a Lambert, a Phong, and a Blinn. Alright. Now these are the key ones that we'll be using in Maya. Now, however, when it translates across to engines, this is where it gets a little bit different. So a Lambert. So a Lambert is a matte material which does not store any specularity data, focusing purely on diffuse reflections. So, like an example of that would be looking at some of the walls in this room, or the blinds. All right. So you would classify those as matte materials. All right, where there's not really any reflective data. That's what specularity is. It's this reflective sort of sheen. All right. In Maya, all right, and in 3ds Max and in Blender, a Lambert is the default material used. All right, because it doesn't have any specularity data in it, it means it's really, really quick and efficient to use. And when you look at it, you're not blinded by weird reflections. All right. It also is a great way of stopping people from using overly reflective things. So when you put it in there, it's not you can see the world and it takes ages to load. All right. It's good for things such as carpet, like I said, those blinds, for walls, and things like that. Things it would not be good for: skin, windows, anything that's kind of translucent or reflects anything. All right, so Lamberts are really, really cool. Then there's the Phong, this thing. So a Phong, I would say, is probably the most average one that we use. It is a standard reflective and specular material. All right, and that's quite similar to a Lambert, except it has a reflectivity channel and a specularity channel, which means that if we shine light on it, it will start to reflect. All right, the specularity allows for subtle changes in which the light is scattered upon the material. So the example here, we have a brushed metal. All right, and you can see rather than just being this sort of like what I would imagine like if you look at a window, you can see how the light sort of bounces off a window or a glass. You can see here, because of the way that the brushed metal works, you can adjust the specularity so it looks like it's actually reflecting off the sort of the highlight of the grains. All right. Fongs are useful for almost everything. All right. You can turn the specularity down, all right, to help create something that looks like a Lambert, but still has some reflectivity. You would find them on glass, polished wooden floors. You would find them on skin. You could use that as a Lambert. Use it on the in this room, the wooden tabletops, on the monitors, and things like that. All right, so Fongs are quite useful. I always say if you're going to create a new material in Maya, best thing to do, don't bother with a Lambert, just use a Phong. All right, because then if you decide you want to change how that material looks later on, you've got access to it, and you don't have to then change it to a Phong, which could mess up some of your data. And then you've got a Blinn. All right, so a Blinn is a more technically advanced variant of a fob. All right, and this one's even better for things like glass, metals, anything that's got really high concentrated reflections. All right, so if you're looking at perfectly polished glass, a Blinn is really, really good, especially if you've got like cracks in it or if it's curved glass. Something I would say is probably a really good one to use it for is like water or plastic bottles, right? Because you're going to get a really high degree of reflectivity. Blinns also allow for refraction. All right, does anyone know what refraction means? Nope. All right, so when light passes through something, all right, it then changes direction. So if you've got something that is translucent, all right, and has a low opacity, when light passes through it, a Blinn will allow it to change direction because it gives it that information. All right. It also has a couple of other things. So it has an advanced fall off. All right, so you can make, whereas with a specular, it's kind of like it's either this really huge specularity or this really low specularity. Blinn allows you to change how concentrated that is. So rather than having it sort of fall off quite gradually, as per usual, you can make it really, really intense and stylized. Thank you for joining us while you're late.
I had to stop at the shop and get some paracetamol. Sorry.
All right. So we tend to use this for more over-the-top, more polished textures or materials. Now, Blinns, as the sort of the more technical out of the three, is more expensive to run because it has to adjust all these different channels. All right, the easiest to run is the Lambert. All right, because it only has its base color and an opacity, and that's it. All right, that's why it's so good, because it's so diffuse, and that it's, you'd think, kind of boring, but it's not just that. We can add more to it. So for your first task, what I want you to do, using the Phong as an example, most materials in video games contain the following texture maps: diffuse, specular, height, normal, and ambient occlusion. What I want you to do is, for the next 20 minutes, I want you to find definitions of all of the following, write them down in a document, and I want you to find some examples of them. All right? So what I want you to do, there are your options. You've got 20 minutes. Go. All right then. So, what did we find out about diffuse maps? Anyone give me any information that they found out? Okay, this is usually the part where you tell me stuff. Ant, can you tell me anything about a diffuse map? Anthony? Can you tell us something about the diffuse map? Adam? It's alright, that's the idea of this part, is that you see if you found the right information and then you go through it. Right. What about you, Sean? What have you found?
The most common kind of like texture map.
Okay, so common texture map.
It defines the color of an object.
Colour and pattern.
Too light or too dark, the texture will require too much diffuse colour condensation.
Yep.
Which will ruin the final project. I didn't get that, but I just wrote it down to see if it thought of.
No, it's good. Can't be too light or dark. Did anyone find anything else out about it? Ross?
With diffuse textures and reflective
No reflectors. Yes. Alright. So, essentially, what a diffuse map is it provides all the colour and pattern data to show us visually what our texture would be. Alright? So if you were to have this whiteboard in a video game, right, the diffuse of that would be literally what you see. Alright, so it would have all of that text on there, part of it as an image. It would have the colour in the background. It would also have this sort of black section, these black bars. Alright, and it would also have like the little sort of grainy look of the material of the whiteboard in the background. Alright, so that is all of the colour data. Alright, if it's too light or too dark, what it starts to do is it starts to mess with some of the other texture maps, such as our specular data in there, and it starts to blow out. Like if you take a photo of something and the exposure is too high, it makes it really bleached. Alright? It's most common because it gives us all of our information that we want to see. And it needs zero reflective data or reflectance, because if you again include that in there, it's going to start messing with other textures. Alright. Anyone find anything about specular? Brandon?
Well, I've got it. It uses the map you use defines the surface shininess and highlights colour.
So, highlights colour. What else? Surface shininess. Surface shine. Anyone find anything else? Well, you find anything about specular maps?
Spectrograms determine how shiny surfaces, those highlighting colour.
Yep. Anything else?
The value of how shiny it is based on value is based on it's given its own specific value. So the higher that value is, the more shiny it will be.
Yep. High values equals more shine. Anyone find an example of a specular map? Alright, so specular map, when you find them, are quite easy. They are, for the most part, black. Black is a value of 0. But as certain parts of your object start to become grayer, closer to white, right, they start to be more shady. Okay, because the value, that colour value is starting to go up. Alright? Now, for the most part, they are black and white. However, you can use specular maps with colour in them to highlight a specific colour. So you could have that specularity come up quite red. Alright, so you can deliberately control that. For the most part, they highlight the colour section of your map, or the diffuse parts, and it's all about surface shine. Alright, what about, where's my tissue here? What about height? Did anyone find anything about height? Harmony, did you find anything about height maps? No. Morgan?
Do they use black to represent minimum height and white to represent maximum?
Height. Real simple. 0 or black is low. 1 white is high. Very similar, and in fact almost identical to a specular map. Alright? You look at them, you're like, oh, okay. Now, height maps by default, will never, ever, ever contain colour. They are a grayscale texture, so it's only values from 0, which is black, to 1, which is white. All right, you can multiply those values to get values of like 10 or 20, something like that. But height maps, what do they actually do? They will find out what they actually do.
So they just present how high and tall like represent.
To a point. So rather than just saying how high it is, if you were to place this on, let me get the lights on, and I will use this thing. Right. So this right here, we've got some specularity on it. You can see as we move it. So we've got specular shine. However, if we were to place a height map on this, what that would do is create extra geometry without the need to model it. Right? This is where text magic is wonderful. So if I show you this straight on, all right, you can see it looks like things come out. Right? Now a height map, what it does, it goes, right, okay, you've got some geometry around here. This bit here is 1, a value of 1, that's come out. This bit here is a value of 0. So this is flat, this is raised. All right, and in between these sort of slanty edges here are a mix between 0 and 1. What they do is they help raise that out so you actually get a raised surface. We use them predominantly to create extra detail for materials, but they're also used in terrain. So if you're wanting to create a very, very quick mock-up of what terrain would look like, you could use a grayscale texture, draw using either a value between 0 and 1, and it will generate your height map. You then put that into a terrain generator and it will create it. It's quite nice. Alright? Easy way to look at it. Flat, that's 0. That's 1. Alright? And all it is the difference between these sections here. It's creating more geometry. So they're wonderful. Height maps are also known as displacement maps. Right, what's the next one? Normals, my favourite. So, did anyone find anything interesting about normal maps? Jen, did you find anything about normals? No? Anyone get to normal maps?
Yeah.
Alright. What did you find out about normal maps? Yes, exactly. So, easy way to do it. Fake, detail, / geometry. Using light. What else?
Is it good for having functions services?
Yep, so that's fake detail stuff. Alright, did anyone get an example of a normal map? No? Right. So, a normal map. We'll use this one. Actually, that's real small. Let's get a large one. Size. Yeah, we'll use that. All right. So on the board, you'll see we have a normal map. So a normal map, for the most part, will look kind of blue, purplish, and that is our main look of a normal map. What it does is it moves predominantly through X, Y, and Z, or in this, R, G, and B. So Red and green, they are our X and Y, and blue is our depth. So if you see values that are really, really red, and not really sort of green or bluish, you're more likely to have some extraneous values. So the values may look really sharp, really pointy and things like that. But a normal map is really, really, really useful for video games. Alright? For a simple reason. So when we come across a wall like this in a video game, alright? Completely flat. However, it looks like it's got this detail here. When you get to it and you turn to the side, you realise it's still flat. Alright, because the way that normal maps work and that they use light to fake geometry, it means that we're able to get higher fidelity, higher detail without having to create that mesh. Right? So, let's say, to put into consideration, using this thing again. Alright? Now, I could use a height map, but height maps, because they procedurally generate that this extra bit here, it means that material is going to be rather expensive in terms of memory, right? Because it has to generate this on the fly. When we turn it, it's going to go, well, you know, you're going to have to see it around this side as well. So we tend to use height maps for things like floors and terrain and things like that, because for the most part, you're not going to get really close to it. However, for normal maps, what that would do is you go, hey look, this has got a real big bevel on the outside of it. It's going to look real cool. And then you turn it to the side, and it's like, huh, that's all flat now. Because you don't need to physically interact with it, you're not going to see it. And that, what's the point of putting something in there that's going to look great from a distance, but not necessarily great when you get close? It's useful for, say, for instance, this cardigan here, and that it would have all of the, when the light hits it, you'd be able to see the light hitting all the little sort of stitching, but that stitching wouldn't be physically modeled. Alright, that's just texture work. Alright, you tend to find with characters, all the skin pores, lines on their hands, scars on their faces, not physically there. Alright, it's all normal maps. And it's all to do with the way that light bounces off it. Alright? Because if light bounces off this and hits it there, it's going to come off at that angle. If it hits here, it's going to come off at that angle. But with a normal map, because the way that it works, the way that our light interacts with this normal map data, is that even if this was flat, it would still come off at that angle, because the light is saying, well, when you hit this, you need to just kind of curve yourself slightly and come back up so it looks a little sharper. Alright? On terrain and things like that, so for flagstone, that means you're more likely to get shading in between all of those areas. Alright? It looks more natural, more detailed. And in that way, it's not going to cost you as many polygons. So with this, we could get rid of like an extra 40 or 50 polygons. With characters, if you're not having to model, say for instance, all of the scrunched up sections of a rolled up sleeve, and you're only using, say, I don't know, 100 on that rather than 100,000, suddenly you're saving yourself a massive amount of data. Alright? Means your game's going to run quicker. Now, you don't necessarily need to worry about these in films, because films, you just render it, it's pre-rendered, it runs straight away. But because video games run real time, normals are a very cheap and useful way of showing off data without worrying about it. Normal maps kind of make your head go, eh? Well, guarantee, if you play any video game tonight that's in 3D, alright, go up to a wall, alright, that's got loads of data on it, loads of detail. I guarantee if you go to the side of it, the majority of it's flat. Right? If you go up to any floors that look like they're kind of like bumping in and out, as you move your camera forward, you'll start to see them raise. That's your height map. Alright? All of these tricks, details are in your games already. and that, but it's understanding how then they trick us into thinking that they don't exist. And the last one, ambient occlusion. Now, this map, also appears as a post-processing effect. Anyone played a game and gone through the settings and you've seen this term, ambient occlusion? No? Do you guys not go through these settings? Alright, I guarantee if you go through settings on any PC game, you'll spot this. Alright. Anyone find out what ambient occlusion was, or is it too far down the list?
Is it like how the shading rendering lets you see how brown and shiny it's like,
No. So, exactly. Now, this is all driven using ambient light data rather than any direct source lights. So, easy way to do it. So, you've got a corner here. Alright, ambient light, it lights everything up. Alright, so you've got pure default light. What's that? Alright, everything lights up perfectly. However, as light travels towards corners or intersecting objects, you get ambient occlusion because the light is going to bounce off and be less effective in corners, like so. So this section will be light, this section will be slightly darker. If you look around the room now, alright, look at all the parts where the ceiling meets the wall. Notice how there's this really strange, thin strip of shadow around all of it. Alright, that's your ambient occlusion. If you can't see that, get your fist, put it in your hand. Alright? Notice despite light being able to fit in between your knuckles and fingers, there's still that thin strip of shading. Easiest way to describe what ambient occlusion is when two objects that are perpendicular, so they're almost like this, right? It is a thin shadow that is occluding that juncture. You can find it in video games when you look at foliage, when they're just starting to kind of cross over each other. When they do that, that shading again between the ambient light is that occlusion. Alright? So ambient occlusion is incredibly useful. If you turn off ambient occlusion in a video game, believe me, it shows. Alright, let me get an example of ambient occlusion up. In fact, this one will be good. So, if I turn the light off, we're not on the board now. On the left, we have our diffuse, so it's got all the colours, all our patterns on it, but no shading. Then you've got your ambient occlusion in the middle, so you can see all those dark areas where that light isn't necessarily going to go. It shows all the recesses and everything like that. When you can then combine it with your diffuse, suddenly you have a lot more realistic looking character. Alright, you can see the shading between the joints, you can see the shading like the rivets, the highlights on more raised sections. Alright, so ambient occlusion is incredibly important. Alright, we tend to find it in situations like this. This is what a standard ambient occlusion map would look like. Obviously a little less blown out because of the projector. Alright, but you can see there for the most part, if it's quite raised up, it's white. The further it goes in, it's more shading towards grey, and even at some points black. Alright, so that when light hits it, no matter what, it's going to influence that shading data, because light's not really going to be able to get down there. Alright. These are your basic materials and texture maps. So all of these combined together would give you a material. All right, your diffuse, your spec, your height, your normal, and your ambient occlusion. Height is optional, but to create a well-rounded material, you will have a diffuse, a specular, a normal, and an AO, right? Because they include everything. Now, you don't necessarily need to have an AO if you're using it as post-processing, because it will automatically figure that out on the fly, but it is more expensive. So if you're running on a very tight memory budget or VRAM budget, that's why we have ambient occlusion maps in there anyway, because they're really cheap to use. But all of this is your standard material workflow. All right, this is the one that I'll expect you to be using. However, if you wanted to go a little bit further, there are some really cool materials out there that we're using in industry. All right, these are PBR or physics-based rendering materials, or you might hear them as physics-based rendering or physically based rendered. But the idea is PBR. They're the latest step in accurate and more defined materials. All right, and that's kind of what we see in 3D and especially video games now. All right, so when you hear about, in fact, do everyone remember the trailer for Call of Duty Ghosts? All right, now Call of Duty Ghosts was built from the ground up. The engine had completely been redone. Essentially, what they've done is they've changed their rendering pipeline. All right, and their rendering pipeline went from our standard, which I've just taught you, to this new one. All right, physically based rendered. And all it did was change the way in which those materials work. So on your left, you've got traditional shader content, and on the right, you've got PBR. Now, already, what's the difference you can see between them? Considering that the model's not changed, what else can we see? Okay. So, easiest thing to notice, it's lighter. And that the plastic doesn't look as shiny. Alright? The metal looks more so and more accurate, especially around this sort of section here. It looks more like a chrome, or like a burnished steel. You've actually got more accurate reflections in your scope, and there's more defined contrast between the different physical materials you'll find on them, and that's because of how PBR works, and that is just essentially assigning this is metal, this is plastic. And PBR, it's just more complex. So rather than using diffuse, it uses albedo. Rather than using specular, it uses either metallic roughness or specular gloss. All right, for more accurate information. Issue is that by default, Maya doesn't work with these. All right, you need to use the PBR workflow on it. Main issue is with that is that also we don't have the software to help do metallic roughness or specular gloss, despite me fighting for it each year. So I still teach it. The change between the two, metallic roughness and specular gloss, all right, is whether the object is dielectric or not. All right, now I know this is a lot to take on a Friday morning, but dielectric materials are magnetic, non-dielectric are. All right. So metal objects can still be dielectric, or non-dielectric, and same with that. Easy way to see is obviously there at the bottom. So you can see a dielectric one there. It looks a bit like plastic, and then you've got your metal material on the right. So this is what the main difference you would see when you view them. All right. Almost all game engines now have PBR. Unity has made the switch as well, which is wonderful, although they still, by default, use traditional shader-based content. They are more expensive to run. All right, so you still get handheld consoles using non-traditional, still using traditional shaded content. Breath of the Wild is still using traditional shaded content. All right, they still exist out there. All right, because they're really cheap to run. All right, in fact, all games on the 3DS don't use PBR. Everything's still using your diffuse, your specular, your normal, your ambient occlusion. Right, it's your top-end games now. Anything that's now made in Unreal uses this, but you can fake it using the traditional one. So you can use traditional shader maps, put them into Unreal, and you can still fake it out. This is this map. All right, and you can kind of make a hybrid between the two. But essentially, that is materials in a nutshell. Well, in the PowerPoint version, anyway. So, what time is it? 10:05. Now, if you could all open up Maya for me, please. All right, open up a model that you've been working on. Let me open the one I was working on yesterday as well. I'm going to show you how to assign materials to your models. And genuinely, it is much easier than you think. So I've already had people asking how to assign colours to something. Now, ideally, you're not working. You have to get out the idea of assigning colours to something. All right. Colours, while great idea, it's not what we want to be thinking of. You've got to start thinking of what is this object made from? What is this face made from? All right, and that's where we assign our materials. So let me just get the magnifier up because we'll need it. So say for instance, I've got an object that I want to assign so these legs here, I want to assign a material to them. So easiest thing I can do is hold right click on the object once I've got it selected. All right. Scroll down until you see these three at the bottom. So assigning new material will bring up a text box which allows you to choose a specific material. Favorite material chooses from a selection that have already been favorited for quick access. And you can see we've got a Blinn, a Lambert, and a Phong. Phong E is just a Phong extension. There's no particular reason to use that now. But the ones obviously that we can use are Blinn, Phong, and Lambert. Existing material are existing materials that you've already created. All right. By default, everyone will have Particle Cloud 1 and Lambert 1. These are your default shaders. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go assign favorite material, and I'm going to create a Phong. Bump. There we go. So this now has a Phong on it. Now to show you the difference between the two, the rest of my body has a Lambert on them. All right, so you can see it's this very, very matte sort of material. If I start to rotate now, you can see that leg is now shiny. All right, and that's because we've got a Phong on it. There we go. Let's just get it at this nice little highlight there. All right, there you go. So to access the information and adjust it, there are two ways you can find it. So on the right hand side in your attribute editor, if I click it, there we go. All right. you can scroll along to the side until you see Phong 1, alright, because that's what I've called it, or it's what it's called by default. You can access it by holding right click over the object that you've got selected and do material attributes, and that will also bring it up in the attribute editor on the right. Alright. And I recommend every time you create a new material, just immediately change the name. Alright, so I'm going to call this legs underscore cloth. Alright. Get into the habit, rather than using spaces, using underscores. Alright, because then when you're creating content and it's given to a programmer, it's a lot easier for them to remember. Alright. So there we go. I've got legs underscore cloth. Now, the common material attribute, pardon me, these will remain exactly the same, no matter what. Alright, you can change the colour. Alright, you can change the hue, the saturation, and the vibrance. So I know that these trousers are actually sort of roughly like this. Like that. You can use the colour picker up there as well. And then when you're happy, click off. Alright, and you can see that's already applied that material to this leg here. Alright. If you can't see that, you may have accidentally clicked this icon here on your at the top of your viewport. Alright. This, if it's like that, that will only show default shader, Lambert shader. Alright, and it applies it to everything. So it's always good to take it off. Alright, there we go. So I've got that there. Alright. You've got transparency, so that'll be how transparent it is. So you can see there, you can start to create transparent objects. Ambient color. So that is essentially, if you put it up to full, it means it's going to take no real sort of shading on there, so you can see everything's kind of defaultly lit with it. Incandescence, so that's the amount of brightness it's going to give off, so how bright it is. Right, so if you have incandescence up to full, and then you can change the colour of that to say this, that means no matter what, it's going to give off this really light blue colour, or this really light white. And you can see as well, as you're working with it, the sample up here as it changes. So if I change my incandescence again, you can see there it's updating on the fly. Bump mapping, that's where we would put in our normal. Diffuse is the strength of our diffuse map. By default, it's at 0.8, all right, because it doesn't want any overblown values in there. All right, translucence, that's how much light is going to be able to pass through it, the depth and the focus of it. By default, you will never change these three values. All right, so don't worry about them. For the most part, you will leave them as their default. It's only when you come to the specular shading sections where you start to change stuff. Cosine power. So cosine power essentially changes how accurate this specular shade is. So if I put this on an angle like that, and I start to adjust that cosine power, you can see how sharper, the higher I get in terms of value, that reflectivity is. Like so. Alright, if I reduce that cosine power, you'll notice that specularity is getting much larger until it covers almost the entirety of the leg. So it's like a lighter, brighter. It's like a more diffused light on it. You can change the specular colour, so you can make it really, really sort of like this. It looks more matte, so that could be like for a monitor. Now, the reflectivity value is incredibly important because it won't show until you render your object outside of your viewport. All right, Maya by default will not show reflectivity other than specular highlights in the scene. All right, purely because it takes far too much in terms of processing power to do. All right. Now, say for instance, we've got this torso here. If I wanted to, I could assign my favorite, go to existing material, leg cloth. And you can see that's now affected on there. But if I wanted something around this center, I wanted these polygons here to be something new, I can select those polygons. I'm going to select them like this. Alright, make sure I've got the ones I want selected and nothing else. Hold right click, assign favorite material, Phong. Alright, so you don't just have to limit yourself to objects. Faces can be given separate materials as well. Alright, so this one I could have as torso, leather. And then I'll go for something like a brown. Something like this. Alright? Like that. Okay? Now, if we obviously then try and do material attributes, it's going to show up the most predominant material on there. So you might not be able to get to the material you want to edit. So to do that, to get to it, and show all the materials you have, at the top of Maya, you'll see this little, it looks like a pupil, alright? This one here, alright? If you click that, this brings up your Hypershade editor, which has every single thing you need for creating your own materials. So if you ever did assign new material, this is what it brings up, and you can see all the different types of shaders that Maya can do. Alright, and there's a lot. Good God, is there a lot. Right. You can see here we've got our different materials. So I've got my legs, my cloth, my default Lambert, my particle, and a glow shader. Alright, and you can see we've got materials, textures, utility, rendering, so that's our default render layer. Any lights if you've got them, any cameras, shading groups. This is where all the magic happens for texturing. For the most part, you will literally stick in materials and textures. Now, pardon me. Christ. If you want to edit one, you can, so for instance torso leather, I can see it's still got a real big shine on it. I literally left click it and my material attributes end up here. So I can come back into here and I can just kind of adjust that specular colour. Just bring that cosine power up just a little bit. There we go, I think that works. But I know that leather's not really reflective, so I'm just going to really bring that value down. But it does reflect a little bit of light. So there we go. So that's going to be my leather. And that is how you create new materials and assign them to objects. Alright? So don't be afraid if you've got well, this arm's like got 3 different textures on it. Remember, as long as you go into face mode and you select faces, you can assign all the different materials you want. Alright, if you accidentally assign the wrong ones, just go over it, assign again. Alright, don't worry about that, it will all be fine. So materials are quite easy to do once you know how to essentially start assigning them. Alright, now I set up this little material environment with some default text materials on them. If you want to use this as a demo for yourself, on the 3D modeling page under lesson 4, alright, where you can see our content for today, alright, there is also a materials scene, and I put some default textures in there that you can have a look at. Alright, and in fact I'm going to download them now as well. Let's save. There we go. There we go. So I'm just going to download those because they'll be useful for me. Alright. So, if you want to download this, you're more than welcome to. But either way, I'll be going through it on the bottom. So what I've got here is I've set up a little render scene filled with the 3 different types of materials that you'd use. So on the left we have our Lambert, here we have our Phong, and here we have our Blinn. And in fact, I might even put some names in there somewhere. Don't think I did. That was on another one. Yeah. So yeah, I've got these ones here. Now I've set this up nicely into groups on the right hand side, so you can turn off all the lights, the walls, the roof, the wall, the world, and the floor. All right. The only things that you can select in here at the moment are the objects themselves. So obviously, if you want to see what a specific object looks like, hold right click, material attributes, and it will pop up here, Black Lambert. Alright, if you want to see all the ones I've got in here, click your Hypershade editor there, and you can see all the different types. I've got 3 blacks, 3 blues, 3 reds, and I've got some text in there as well. Alright, so these are all using the proprietary main ones. If you want to just focus on a specific group, if you click panels, I know some of you have accidentally messed up your cameras before. If you click panels and go to perspective, I've set up a Blinn, a Lambert, and a Phong camera. They're locked in place. So if you click Blinn, it will literally take you to the Blinn materials. If you click Lambert, it will take you to the Lambert materials. Alright, and obviously Phong, it'll take to the Phong ones. And you can see already the difference just by switching to them that each one has. Now, if you use this, you can render it out. So by clicking the Arnold tab and clicking play, and I'm going to change my persp shape to, say, the Lambert. And then click play. And here we are, it's rendering out my Lambert. It's wonderful. Alright, so this rendering takes some time. But what you can tell here is that this is what it would look like in a video game. So it's real matte, sort of looking shape. Quite nice. Alright. If I was to select this one, so select it, hold right click, go to material attributes. You can see this one has no specularity data in there. Alright. If I then render out the Phong, this is where it gets a little bit different. So let me just go to my renderer down here. So if you have a quick look, this is what the Phong looks like. And then this is the Lambert. No, that's the Lambert, this is the Phong. So already we're getting much more detail in what these objects could be. We've got an object on the right which looks like the plastic shrink wrap. Alright, we've got a highly reflective sphere in the center. But the important part is that these look more accurate. We can see with this sphere, it's got 0.5 reflectancy. So this is the default looking Phong. All right, and look how much data it's reflecting in there. All right, we're able to get all of that information, or we can see the outside world. You can see the lights reflected in it. And we can see in this one it's also reflecting this material here, this object. If you change it to the Blinn, and we render it out, look how much more precise those reflectivities are. Alright, and it's all because we can mess around with the data. Alright, so if you want to use any of these as like an archetype, so you can literally take these materials if you want, study them. I think I maybe put some notes in for this one. You're more than welcome to. Yes. Now, if you select one of these objects in your attribute editor, you'll see I've put some notes in with them. Alright, so feel free at any point, just obviously drag this up. You can see there all these different tips, tricks, and breakdowns of each material. Alright, so when you go onto the Phong, it's literally just for the new ones, for the new bits. Did I put them on? Pretty sure I put them on that one. Either way, feel free to use those. Alright, other than that, this has been your material introduction.